focusing on how we can ask better questions so we can understand what the people who are our customers need from us, the people who work for us need from us, the people who work with us need. Ask better questions. Then, of course, when we ask better questions, we need to be able to also listen to hear those answers. So that's what this session is about today. We're going to encourage everybody to turn on your video. You can see Katie and I, and one of the great things about communication is that 80% of communication comes from body language. So it doesn't matter where you are, if you got your kids, turn on your video so we can see you and you can see us. It's a really important part of this kind of communication in our virtual world. And if you have questions, we'll stop every couple of slides and you can raise your hand or you can put them in the chat. And Carly, if you're monitoring the chat, you can take a look and we can answer your questions. Many webinars are actually kind of talking at you. We don't see you, you don't see us. There's no opportunity for two-way communication, but since this is a session about asking better questions and listening better, we'd like to practice at the same time. So it's going to be an interactive session, and we're thrilled that you're all with us, and we totally appreciate it. So Katie is going to start out, and she's going to start out here on our topic of asking better questions.
So, hi everyone. It's great to be here with you today, and as always with my friend and partner, Karyn. Something for myself personally that I have had to really pay attention to or have put increased focus and intention to is about asking better questions. And this has been really transformative for myself as a person and as a leader and as a coach. And I often ask this question to people, which is harder on a webinar, but what is our usual habit as humans? And more often than not, our habit is to show up more on this spectrum of telling versus asking. And there's nothing wrong with telling. In fact, it's one of the important things for leaders to do, to tell and set the direction, sometimes to teach. But our habit, we have this imbalance where we show up telling people our idea all the time. And there are a few things that are challenging with that. One is when we tell, we take ownership of problem-solving responsibility for somebody. So we end up personally owning all the problems. And as a leader in an organization, if we're the one who's responsible for solving problems and telling everything, we're never going to actually get very far. We also can often disengage people because think about a time when you've come forward to someone with a problem and they just start jumping in with all their ideas how to fix it. Sometimes that feels helpful, but a lot of times they're like, I wanted to talk about it. I didn't want you to tell me what to do. So it disengages at the same time. If we can show up by asking more questions, we actually help invite people's thinking and help them create capability for problem solving as well. So it's not that telling is bad and asking is good. It's about knowing the right thing to do in that situation and how we can show up and be most helpful. And it's about creating more awareness for ourselves about when we're telling and when we're asking. So Karyn, can you share next slide, please?
I can.
Thank you. And one of the big ahas I've had is I thought I was very proud of myself. Like I'm asking more questions. I'm trying to help people. Well, this is a wolf dressed up as a sheep. And oftentimes we think we're asking questions when we're really telling people our ideas. It's our idea dressed up with a question mark on it. So Karyn, you can navigate through this slide here. So like, have you tried my idea? What about talking to so-and-so? Giving options like those closed-ended questions. Have you done this or this? That could be answered as yes or no, or how about this idea, or this idea? We're actually telling people rather than asking a true humble inquiry question, as Edgar Schein has phrased it. and what's really important to be paying attention to is, are we asking a question because we are wanting to direct someone to what's going on in our head? Or are we asking a question with the intention to help somebody else think more deeply about the problem that he or she is working through? And that intentionality is really important as well. So I call these fake questions because they're not questions, they're your idea. So if you're going to if you're going to offer up an idea, just be honest about it and say, I want to offer up a suggestion, rather than disguising it as a question. So you can go through, Karyn. And so when we're asking better questions, if you ask a question that starts with what, or the next one, how, I'm used to driving it. What or how tend to be questions that are more likely to be humble inquiry questions. So they can be disguised as these sort of fake questions like, how about trying my great idea? But more often than not, things like, who have you talked to, or what have you done so far? Or what led you to that conclusion? How is this happening? Who have you gone to talk to? These are the questions that help elicit someone else's thinking, opposed to being directive about what they should be doing. And this is not to say that telling or teaching or providing guidance is not a good thing to be doing, but that our imbalance, again, is more with doing that telling. So how can we start practicing asking more of these questions? And then, as Karyn's going to talk about, how do we listen and really hear what they're saying, and not be so caught up in our own head about what we're trying to problem solve or go to, but really be present for that other person. So I will turn it over to Karyn, because these are sort of partners, the asking and the listening.
Yes, and Katie, I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
Why do we just tend to dress up our questions in sheep's clothing? Like, why do we have a tendency to do that?
That's a great question. We actually have never talked about this one, Karyn. I don't know if I have the right answer or not, but I think is that we have a desire to be helpful. And we also have a desire to be problem solvers. And we all most of us like to be thinking about what's going on. And it feels more helpful to be asking a question rather than telling someone what to do. But we're actually being disingenuous in this because we're actually doing the telling. I don't know. What do you think, Karyn?
I think the same thing. And I also think that we don't spend a lot of time ever practicing how to ask better questions.
Yeah.
I know for myself, I probably spent 5 years practicing how to ask better questions. Probably at a certain point, I noticed something about myself, and the something that I noticed was that I actually didn't ask anybody any questions at any time.
Yeah, totally.
And then I thought, what am I going to do about this? How can I get to be a better question asker? Because if I don't ask other people any questions, I'm just stuck with my own perspective.
Right. Yes. I think that we often are also not aware, as you said, that we are asking these dressed up questions. What I found to be really helpful for myself, and then also when I've been working with others, is to either record yourself and listen later, or ask somebody to write down word for word what you're saying. And that's amazing evidence of practice when you look at a list of things that you've said. Oh my gosh, I was making all these statements, or I was asking all these leading questions. It can be really powerful and help with making that shift and start to create that awareness. So for sure, I think it's hard. Yes.
All right. So oftentimes when we're working on improving our soft skills, we start with something like, okay, well, let's learn to ask better questions. One of the things we then forget is that, as well as asking a better question, once we have the answer to a question, we need to be a better listener. How many of you have been in a meeting where someone's asked a question, could have been a good question, not even a leading question, and all of a sudden there's no pause and the person just goes on to answer the question.
Yep.
Happens all the time. If you've ever had that happen to you, raise your hand. Because sometimes we think that asking a question is enough. But actually, when we ask a question, we have to give the person whom we're asking the question to room and space to answer. Sometimes we have to think about the answer. Katie, I asked you a question and you had to think about the answer, correct?
Yes, for sure. Something I've learned that I've had to do to counteract my habit of asking a question and being pretty uncomfortable with more than a few seconds in silence is to count to 10 in my head, because it is really around that time, 7, 8, 9, or 10, that people have actually had a chance to do a little bit of thinking and even ask another question or come forward. So we're so uncomfortable with that silence, we just rush to fill it.
So I probably spent 5 years learning to ask a better question and practicing that. I've spent more time, 10 years, practicing and learning to become a better listener. And what I've learned about becoming a better listener is that we need to listen with open eyes, open ears, open mind, and an open heart. And as you'll see, I always point: open eyes, open ears, open mind, and an open heart. And you might think, well, that's very strange, because doesn't listening have to do with our ears? Isn't it just hearing what the other person is saying? I think that is actually a very small portion. Our ears are giving us a very small portion. So let's talk about listening with open eyes. Here's one of the reasons that I wanted you all to turn on your video, because 80% or more of communication is actually nonverbal communication. So when we're talking with someone and we can't see them, we only get part of the message. So we can hear the words that people are saying, and if we're paying attention, we might actually hear the tone of their voice, but we're probably missing a lot of the communication. So in order to become a better listener, especially in this time when we're physically distanced from people, it's really important that we have a way that we can see them. Video chat is absolutely great. So when I'm working with people, many times they're uncomfortable turning on their video, and I'll say it's actually not an option, right? If we're talking with each other, we need to be able to see each other, because otherwise it's not going to be possible for us to hear each other properly. I may ask you an open-ended question, and if I can't hear you, your word might say yes, but your body language might be like this, saying no, no, no. So I might be led to misinterpret what you're going to say. So it's really super important, especially at this time when we can't be together physically, that any discussion you're going to have with someone, especially if it's going to be a crucial conversation of some sort, you need to have it where you can see the person. And even if the person is uncomfortable with video, say, let's give it a try, right? Let's work on it, because I can't hear you if I can't see you properly. I'm also going to suggest that the really super important thing is to really listen. So many of us have just gotten into the habit of asking questions and communicating by email. Email, again, we cannot see the person. We cannot see their reaction to our question. We cannot then listen with open eyes, because we're just reading something on a page and we cannot see the body language. I am sure many of you have misinterpreted something that you've read in someone's email, called them up, been upset or angry, and found out actually, guess what? That's not what they meant at all. So in order for us to be able to listen properly, we need to see the person, and not only see the person, we need to be focused on looking what their body language is. Are they in a relaxed manner? Are they leaning forward in their seat, meaning they're interested in what we're saying? Are they smiling, right? Are they nodding? Are they open and engaged with us? And if they're not, do their words match with what they're saying? So listen first, always with open eyes. Open ears. Once we're looking at the person, we also have to be really focused on using our ears to hear the actual words that someone is saying and their tone of voice. So I'm going to say that a lot of the time when we ask someone a question and then they give us an answer, we may be looking at them, our eyes may be on them, but our ears are not necessarily open. We're not really hearing their words. You know whose words we're hearing? We're hearing our own words. We're hearing the voice inside our head.
Yeah.
We're hearing the voice inside our head of what we want to answer them.
Yes.
We're hearing the voice inside our head with the one-up story.
Yep. Getting ready to talk is not the same thing as listening.
No. And is one of the things that's the easiest to work on about becoming a better listener is actually, when you ask a question, noticing if you are hearing something going on in your own head and your own voice saying, oh, this is what I should be doing. Oh, this is what I'm going to tell the person to do next. Here's my best advice. Because when we're listening to ourselves and our own voices, we aren't actually processing and hearing the words that someone is saying. And words matter. A person's word choice matters, and a person's tone of voice matters. So again, we may ask a person a question, and they may answer us, yes, I'd love to do that. But actually, the tone of their voice is very strained. Yes, I'd like to do that. Or they're kind of gritting their teeth while they're saying it. As human beings, it's actually somewhat difficult for us to focus outside of ourselves on someone else. We're very self-centered, and we think our ideas are best and our way of doing something is the best way, and that's okay. This is the way all of us are. And as Katie said, we're also very hopeful. So when we hear someone saying something to us or asking us a question about how to do something, we automatically want to jump in and give them help. It seems like a kind thing to do. But actually a better thing to do is listen, see what the person is saying, hear the words and the tone of their voice that they're saying, because then you're going to have to decide what to do. Yeah. Is it a situation in which you're going to want to ask the person another question to gain clarity? If you see that there's actually a disconnect between the words they're saying and the tone of their voice or their nonverbal communication, maybe you need to actually ask a open-ended clarifying question to say that. Or you might ask a question like, I hear the words that you were saying, I hear that you said this and that, however, your body language, right? I see you got your arms crossed, so I'm not sure how to interpret this message. So we have to give ourselves space to focus on the actual words someone is saying. So that's listening with open ears.
I'd like to add one element. What's so important about that too, in addition or building on what Karyn said, is we come to conversations and interactions with a lot of assumptions about what's going on for the other person. And perhaps, as Karyn said, that we assume they need us to tell them what to do, when in fact, by asking a question, we get the current condition and have more information about how we can be more helpful for them. And so by asking questions, it helps us not be operating on assumptions about what that person needs for us to be helpful.
Thank you. And that leads into listening with an open mind. So again, as people, we actually tend to be hearing our own thoughts and our own perspective and deciding based on assumptions on our needs what somebody else wants or needs from us. Oftentimes, we don't like what other people are saying to the answer to a question we may have asked, or even just what somebody is saying to us in not an answer to a question we've asked. I'm sure many of you have been at work and had an employee who's come to say something that you might have found it hard to hear. At home too, because all of this works fabulously at home as well, that we've talked to our spouse or we've talked to a child and we want them to think in a certain way. We want them to believe in a certain way. We want them to have a reaction of what we want them to have. But actually they don't. They have their own perspective. They have their own way of thinking about things. They have their own desires, wants, based on their own experience. So we actually have to listen with an open mind to be able to hear the perspectives of others. And especially in this time of crisis, that is an unbelievably important part, because when we're in crisis, all of those hormones, the adrenaline, the cortisol, all of those things add to our stress. And it makes us go back to our reptile brain processing. And we just want to figure out the immediate solution and do something now, and we want to do it our way because that's the way that makes us feel safe. But nobody actually has been in this situation before. And in order to come up with the creative new ways to work and the solutions to problems our organizations are having, and to filter all of the gajillions of information that each and every one of us is bombarded with every day about what we should do, what we could do, what's safe, what's not safe, the information that's changing constantly, we actually have to be able to listen with an open mind, to hear the perspectives of other people, to hear what other people know and what other people have found out, because we probably don't have enough information. Our perspective will be broadened if we listen to others as well. Open eyes, open ears, open mind. And the last one is to listen with an open heart. And it goes with hearing other people's perspective as well. Because oftentimes, even when other people are saying words that are a different perspective, we may have a judgment. As people, we tend to be very judgmental. Our perspective is a really good perspective and it's the right perspective. And someone who thinks differently might have a wrong perspective, right? But we have to actually open our heart and be empathetic to someone else's situation and be non-judgmental, because we make a lot of assumptions about how people are thinking, about how they're feeling, what their situation is, all of the different kinds of things, and we make those things based on our own perspectives, our own experiences. Those may not, and certainly are often not, the perspectives of others. So when someone, an employee or a spouse or a child, comes and says to you, and you're looking at them and you're paying attention to them, your eyes are open, you're hearing the words, your mind is open to their perspective, but your heart may be saying, I don't think so, I'm putting a judgment on that one, right? That we have to open up our heart as well as our mind, our ears, and our eyes, so that we can pay our full attention to what someone else is saying to us. And it's really super important at this time, because it's easy to jump to conclusions. It's easy to jump to solutions. It's easy, actually, under the stress that we're all in, to be combative and to bump heads with people, because actually we're not taking the time to truly listen to what they're saying. And just like Katie was saying, that we need to put a pause between the asking the question and the answering the question to let the other person speak, we also need to put a pause between our own response, right? We need to first think to ourselves, am I listening with open eyes, open ears, open mind, and an open heart? I need to count to 10 and I need to think what my response is going to be. Sometimes it's a better idea to count to longer than 10 and say, I see what you mean, I hear what you're thinking. I need to take some time to open my mind and heart and think about it. And why don't we set up some time tomorrow or the next day to come back to have a discussion again? Because if we're angry and we're emotional, it actually becomes harder and harder to listen to the other person, because what we're really hearing is our own feelings and our own thoughts. And then when we choose our words and our body language too quickly, it might give the wrong communication, or a communication we might be sad that we had later on. So unbelievably important is to spend time practicing. How can you practice listening? How can people ask me this all the time? How can I practice listening? So here's a couple of good ways that I'm going to suggest, and then we're going to open this up for questions, because Katie and I wanted to make sure to have enough time to have a dialogue and to hear your questions and answer them. Is that a really good way to practice listening is to, when you engage in dialogue with anybody, to listen and then say back to them, okay, this is what I heard you say. This is what I believe it means. Tell me if I'm on the right track. And then you'll hear back. Sometimes you're going to hear that you didn't even hear the words that someone was saying. Sometimes they're going to say, that's not what I meant at all. And then you can work to figure out why that difference. But it's a technique that I use very often, is to mirror back what somebody said. I think I heard you say this, and I think you meant this, because what I hear and what someone meant might be different. So who has a question for Katie and I about asking questions and becoming a better listener? And Katie, I'm going to ask if you'll look in the chat.
Yep. There's a question here about how do you approach people who are not so good at listening and tend to always interrupt others? That's a great question. As a recovering interrupter, well, I was someone who didn't, I didn't mean to be interrupting. I just got so excited about helping someone. And so I think it depends on how open that person is to getting some feedback and self-awareness. So if there's someone who would be sort of more open to hearing that, I would hold up the mirror and say, this is my experience when this happens to you, to me, when you're interrupting, I'm not able to talk. If people are not as receptive to that, there could be other ways that you can give them that feedback as well. Karyn, what do you think?
I'm going to say that I think most people are unaware of the fact that they are interrupting you. And even if they are aware of the fact that they're interrupting, I think that they're unaware of the fact that actually it's bothersome to
the impact
of the impact. So I have a couple of suggestions. And actually, now that we're in the virtual world, this is a perfect time to work on this. If you're a manager or a supervisor and this is one of your team members, because we're in the virtual world and we're doing a lot of meetings on Zoom, and many of them, or other video chat, and many of them are recorded, it's a great time, if you notice that one of your team members has this trait, to say, I think that there's something that we could work on together, and you can play them back a video. In this case, you can actually show them, right? You could, if you're a team leader, you could bring this up as a topic that everybody's going to work on, right? So we don't single someone out. If it's your spouse or your child, then I think, kindly and gently, we could have a discussion with them. I think most people are unaware that they're doing it. And I would actually just bring up the topic and say, I noticed that in this situation, you might interrupt me, or this situation, are you aware of that? Because first a person has to become aware, and then once they're aware, we have to help them figure out why they're doing it, and also, to, as Katie said, to tell them how it makes you feel.
Yes, I agree. Many people would be not happy to know the impact that their actions are having.
How long did it take you to recover from being an interrupter, Katie?
A long time, but and I still do it. I noticed I sort of interrupted you a little bit. I get eager to share, but I've had some practices that have helped me. So once it was having that self-awareness, was if I caught myself getting kind of antsy wanting to say something, I would literally have to count. I would have to just pay attention to that and stop myself to almost sit on my hands. But with creating greater awareness and a plan for what to do when I noticed that I was interrupting, I've been able to quiet that, as well as, and this is for anything, if you're trying to practice asking more effective questions or listening, and I think someone in here said earlier, having to take a deep breath. Well, I call that sort of taking an intention pause before going into a conversation, just reminding yourself like, here are a few of my habits that are maybe not as effective. In this conversation, I'm really going to practice asking open-ended questions and not interrupting. And almost just setting that intention or reminding yourself of that can be really helpful, and then following through with that. And even just taking a quick reflection at the end of the conversation, like, I started to interrupt a few times, I noticed that. And so it's those quick PDCA, plan, do, study, adjust cycles that we can do for ourselves to help create habits. But having that pause to remind ourselves of the behavior we want to be exhibiting can be very powerful and effective. So I have found that to be helpful for me. I have to remind myself constantly. We never get rid of old habits. We just replace them with stronger ones.
When I was practicing asking better questions, I also told everybody, I'm working on asking more questions. First, I had to work on asking some questions, and then more and better. And I just told everybody, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm working on improving my personal communication. And I'm going to ask you at the end of our conversation, did I ask you enough questions?
Yes.
Do you feel as the person I was communicating with? And you might think that people would think that's strange, but actually people didn't think it was strange at all. Then they thought, most often they said to me, what a great idea. I'm going to try doing that too, right?
Yes. That's really powerful. I've done the same thing, and actually have encouraged others whom I'm coaching to do that. And some leaders have said, oh, well, I'm supposed to be, I'm not supposed to show that I'm imperfect. Well, actually, it does the opposite, people have found, and I've found for myself, by showing that we too are working on becoming better and more helpful, and that we're working our own self-improvement. It also kind of levels that playing field as well, and creates a more trusting relationship in many ways. So it serves many purposes. You get feedback for your own self, but you also create a sense of relationship and I guess humanness, I would maybe call it. Yeah. All right, let's look at some other questions. How do you help someone overcome the fear of asking questions in order to gather much needed information? So I would ask some more questions to understand what is the person afraid of, and what's going on for them, to uncover sort of what are some of the personal barriers around that. So that would be one thing to work with someone on their personal level. But I said just sort of a general suggestion would be kind of building on what Karyn and I were just saying, would to label what you're doing and saying, I'm here to ask questions to help you solve this problem or understand what's going on more. So I want to ask a few questions to help you. and introducing sort of the context of why the questions are happening, and it can give an entry point to that. Karyn, what are some other ideas you have?
Well, I had a question for you, Katie.
Hmm.
Do you think you can give us a couple of examples of some good open-ended questions that we might ask to someone who was afraid to ask a question?
So the question to ask that person to understand why they're, yeah. So I guess what happens when you do ask questions? What's your experience with asking questions? What is one question you have tried to ask people? You know, why is it important for you to gather this much needed information? I don't know, those are just a few things that come to my mind right now. I'm sure there's more if I can keep thinking about it. I'd be really wanting to understand for that person what goes on for them, and what are some of the contexts maybe they feel more comfortable and less comfortable asking questions, and understand what their intention is, like why is it important, and then what are the barriers.
And I think this is when our ability to listen is going to be really important as well, where you're going to have to use your open eyes, open ears, open mind, and open heart to the best of your ability, because somebody who's afraid, it's possible they're going to give you an answer that you don't want to hear. Wherever that fear is coming from, we don't know what it's generated, but you might think it's something that's silly to be afraid of, right? So you're going to have to open your heart and be non-judgmental, because the first thing you're going to think about is, that would never bother me, right? This is the way we are as human beings. You're going to have to open your mind, because maybe the person is going to say, I'm afraid to ask questions because in our team meeting, when I've asked them before, other people have laughed at me or I felt shut down. And maybe we don't want to hear that perspective. We should especially listen with open eyes as well to see what the person's body language is. When we're with them in other situations and they ask a question, we can ourselves look and see, is the person, do they look more comfortable asking the question in this situation? Oh, now we're with this other team in this other department. I can see the person's clammed up in there. Now they've asked a question, but their lips are tight and their tone of voice is strained. So those, I would use my listening skills very well too. And I think whoever asked this question, it's great that you've asked this question because you've identified a need for someone. And I think you should certainly ask more questions and listen and follow up, because it will be of great help to whoever is having that difficulty.
Yes. All right, the next question was, how do you address others whose cultural communication styles are different and might be offended by what you say and or do? So
I think this is a super interesting question, because of course, one of the things that you don't know about Katie is that Katie leads trips to Japan, study trips to Japan, where of course the communication style is
very different.
Is very different. I'm a very loud person. And Japan is very quiet. So when I went to Japan, of course,
I cringe, Karyn, thinking
I'm on the subway. Nobody is talking. Everybody is quiet. I'm on the Shinkansen, the bullet train, in the car that you can talk, but I'm probably the loudest one, right?
Yes. I'm cringing inside only because I'm a very loud person too. A few points on that. I think, you know, when we're going into other cultures too, it's helpful to understand what are the cultural norms and then how to be, what is respectful there. And in the same way, when we're working with groups of people from different countries, it's helpful to understand what are different cultural norms. And, you know, and sometimes maybe it's even having some sort of conversation to lay out, we may come from different cultures, but this is the group norm for us in terms of how we're going to communicate here. I know for me, like in Japan, I had to become a much better listener, and it was great practice to get really comfortable with long silences. There's a lot of long silences in any conversation, and it's really uncomfortable as a Westerner, and it made me very aware of how much I even want to fill the space, even with being a better listener. But creating sort of that group norm or norm of relationship and calling out and having discussion around some of those things can be really helpful, because we may make assumptions about what is offensive or not. And I think if we come to things with an open heart, first and foremost, and I would say that people say when they come to Japan, oh, I don't want to offend anyone. I said, you know what, if you are showing that you're genuinely caring and interested, a lot of things can be forgiven. People know you're not from that country. So if you're coming in really with open heart and an open mind, that first and foremost will take care of many things. And then we can have those conversations about what are, what's more culturally fits in that situation.
Right, and I'm going to agree, and I think Katie and I really do come from the world asking more and better questions and becoming a better listener, that and especially I guess as I've gotten older and I've asked more questions and learned to become a better listener, I really don't assume anything. So I would actually honestly really ask a question at the beginning of something. How should we all communicate together? How can we create the best way to communicate? Is my communication, you know, does it fit in with your cultural norms? I think that when we are open about that in the beginning of working with people, or if we feel that there's a problem and we bring that in a kind way with open heart to the table and ask an open-ended question and listen because we care about the answer, and then we're going to do something, I think that's always the best way to deal with anything.
Yeah, I agree. Great question.
Great question.
All right, and as another great question, you guys have many great questions. If you're a team leader, how do you balance leading / mentoring with questions that are truly interrogative? So I would go back to, what's the intention around asking the questions? And I would say, if something's becoming an interrogation, are you really listening with an open heart and an open mind? And what's the purpose behind asking the questions? Is it punitive? What are you leading with? If you are there to really help solve a problem, the more we can really show up asking those open-ended questions to help somebody understand what happened or what should be happening is often much more effective than coming in a sense of interrogation. There are a few ways that I help people do this. So sometimes if we're sitting even across from each other in a room and asking questions, it can start to feel like an interrogation. Rather, if we sit next to each other and look at a piece of paper together, it feels more coach-like and more friendly. Just changing that dynamic. Also, asking questions and helping someone think. If it's question, answer, question, answer, question, answer, that can feel like an interrogation as well. So it's, it should be, in the lean worlds, often we say catch ball. It's asking a question and then receiving some information. It should be catch ball, not dodge ball. So you're not like throwing questions at the other person. So it's getting back to the reason behind that. And then there are times that really asking, there is some telling, and if something went wrong, but we often lead with blaming the person rather than really examining the process. Something else I also suggest is we often use the word why to lead a question, and why questions can be really helpful and great when we are looking at causation for like, you know, why is there a gap between what should be happening and what is actually happening? Sometimes unintentionally when we use the why, it can sound judgmental. Why were you thinking that? Why did you do that? Those are not causation questions about the process. So that they can land in a sense where it is an interrogation or there is judgment. So just be cautious when you use the word why, of how it may land with the other person. So sometimes I like to switch it to a what or a how question, like what steps did you take to come to that conclusion? What was happening in the process that led to that outcome? So why did you do that? Why did that happen? That can sound more like an interrogation. So it's not that you know, sometimes there is that telling, but anyway, just to be aware of when it's becoming an interrogation. Karyn, what would you like to add?
I'd like to add that this is a time where I'd say listening with open eyes is really important, because it's an opportunity from, you know, Katie and my lean background, is to actually go with the person and see what's happening. So I even think back so often to raising children. Mine are adults now. Right? When I'd have the why are you doing this? Why did you make that decision? But actually, once you go with the person to see what they're working on and use your eyes to see what's happening, because oftentimes a person will be explaining with words to you, but we're not understanding the words. The words they're using are making sense to them. They aren't making sense to us. So go and see together.
Yep.
And listen with open eyes. That's what I would suggest. Do we have any other questions, Katie? We might have time for one more.
Let me see. I think we've gone over all the questions. If I missed one, please let me know. There were some other comments and great interaction on the chat, everyone. Thank you. Some other good suggestions in here. Yeah, I don't see another question, but I want to share a story then that fit right with what you were just saying. So I have been writing a book to document my friend Mr. Isao Yoshino's leading and learning journey at Toyota over 40 years. And he tells this story of his first week or his first months at Toyota. So this was in the late 1960s when he joined. He's a young guy just out of college, and there's a 4-month orientation period, and he was put in the Motomachi plant in Toyota City and in the paint shop. And he was asked to put in the solvent in the paint, you know, every few hours to mix it, and it was going to spray the cars. Well, you know, it's kind of a boring job, and he One time, one of the floor managers came running into the paint shop. About over 100 cars, the paint wasn't sticking to them. And, you know, oh my gosh, it was this big frenzy. And young Mr. Yoshino knew that he was the culprit. It was his mistake. But instead of the boss starting an interrogation, what did you do? Why did that happen? You know, all of that. They said, show me what you did. So to Karyn's point, show me what you did. So he showed them what he did. Turned out the cans looked very, very similar to each other. And instead of yelling at him, instead of blaming him for the mistake that was going to actually cost, you know, a lot of money, a lot of rework there, the manager said to him, "Thank you for making this mistake, and we are sorry. I'm sorry that we did not set up the working conditions for you to be successful." Now I'm paraphrasing the story here, but to me, this is just a really powerful story of how to ask questions, to go see, to show respect, and to take the responsibility as leaders to set the conditions for someone to be successful. So that manager could have started an interrogation and blamed, but instead by going to see and to asking those questions of how did this happen, tell me more, he had a very different outcome. And so just think about the culture that was set at Toyota because of managers showing up in that way versus showing up in a form of interrogation. So still really being team leaders and setting direction and solving problems, but also leading with the heart and taking responsibility.
And I think that actually takes us very well into our last slide, which is really the fact that asking better questions and becoming a better listener isn't just something that's going to help us be more productive at work, make more money, be better companies, any of those things. Actually, what it's going to do is going to create a better world for all of us. Every single one of us is different. Every single one of us is here on earth for a particular purpose. And as we've all found out in the last little while, all of us are actually in this together, and we need each other. And we need the help that we can give each other. And the only way we're going to get that is by asking questions, because we're really interested in finding answers that are going to be better for all, and then listening with open eyes, open ears, open mind, and an open heart. So from the bottom of our hearts, Katie and I want to say thank you very much for joining us today. Katie and I have a coaching community, and it's a very vibrant community which we run, and we love all kinds of participation. We talk about coaching, we practice asking better questions, listening better, working on your purpose, setting your intention, and we're always happy to help. So you're always welcome to join our community and reach out to us in any way.
Yes, thank you. And we have another cohort starting at the end of May too, so just to throw that in there. Thank you everyone for your great questions. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, so thank you, and we always end the same way, which is from the heart. All right, bye everybody.